Y'all ready for another wacky and weird apocalypse theory about the end of the world? Well, it's about the weirdest apocalypse you could think of. One day, our planet may become completely overgrown with food. And the problem is, it could happen a lot sooner than you might think possible. It'll be some end. Suddenly there'll be grain everywhere. Grain in the countryside, grain on the beaches, grain shooting up along every road, in your backyard. Grain, 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 popping up from the cracks in the sidewalks. More grain. Everywhere you look, everywhere you go, grain, grain, grain. Now, if that isn't a green revolution, what is? Of course, there'll be plenty to eat, but there is a drawback. Bread will also be the only thing around. The grain will overrun all other crops, agriculture will be disrupted, forests and grasslands will be demolished. Slowly, the entire food chain breaks down as the face of the planet turns into an endless field of waving grain. Governments will speak of the grain problem and cook up plans to push the grain back, but the grain won't listen. Suddenly, mankind finds itself in trouble. Diseases emerge, people go blind or develop brittle bones, all because of the one-sidedness of their diet. And then there are the side effects. Every now and then, suffocating grain dust tempests sweep over the planet. Incredible grain field fires occasionally burn down a country or two. Entire continents dry up as the grain sucks up all the water. The atmosphere, having to deal with the grain dust and the smoke from the grain fires and the lack of water, will get messed up, and there'll be an ice age or even a kind of nuclear winter. It isn't very hard to see what it all boils down to. Humanity is thrown back into the Stone Age. Well, the Grain Age is a more accurate word. So next time you have a slice of bread, just remember, one day, bread could do us all in. Sound a little far-fetched? Sorry, but it isn't. Not at all. The grain we're dealing with here isn't just the next species of grain. We're talking super grain here. Grain that is genetically modified. Already there are hundreds of genetically modified GM crops around. The idea is quite simple. Genes define the properties of everything that grows and lives. So in genetic engineering, what you basically do is take a crop, add a gene here, take out a gene there, and there you have it. A new species of grain with some handy new properties. Examples could be also seedless oranges, seedless watermelon. It's not natural for living objects to not create seeds or living plants. That happens through genetic modification. Genetic engineering is quite cool, really. You can make super maize or super corn that's resistant to certain diseases, so you don't have to spray all those polluting pesticides all over them. You can create a new brand of super rice that's nutritious enough to feed even the poorest of countries. Heck, you can even piece together a super apple that protects your teeth from rotting, or a super potato that survives a cold frost, a super tomato that will grow in salt water. If you think that all sounds too weird to be true, don't look now, but these crops already exist today. Of course, governments and genetic companies are cautious. You don't just want your new breeder or super crop to accidentally mix up with the common stuff. Genes pass from one generation to the next. So if you mix up genetically modified crops and common crops, in no time you'll only have the GM species left. GM crops having a huge evolutionary advantage over the ordinary stuff. Still, this leaking of GM crops into normal nature is exactly what's happening as we speak. In China, where there's little government control over GM farming, the so-called golden rice is rapidly replacing common rice. At this moment, 5.5 million farmers worldwide grow genetically modified crops. In only 4 years' time, the amount of farmland consumed by GM crops has doubled, from 25 million hectares of farmland in 1998 to more than 50 million hectares in 2002. That's about an area the size of Italy. Meanwhile, in the West, every now and then, an accident happens. In Canada, genetically altered oilseed rape escaped from test fields in the countryside. Right now, super oilseed rape is shooting up everywhere in Canada and in Mexico. Already altered super maize suddenly showed up in November 2001. And this really baffles everyone because Mexico has banned all GM farming. Experimental GM crop fields are regularly demolished by protesters, but there's a catch. On at least 2 occasions, the protesters helped the GM plants escape into nature, accidentally taking the seeds with them on their clothes and on their shoes. Oh, okay, so it seems reasonable to conclude that one day, most crops on the planet will be genetically tinkered with in one way or another. Okay, so what, you may ask? As long as it tastes good, there's no reason to worry, right? Well, there are some disturbing risks. One day soon we may create a true super crop that is utterly resistant to disease and pollution and is able to grow in literally any environment. A crop like that might take over the countryside in no time and start haunting us. Your beloved new crop will turn out to be a pain in the ass. An eradicable super weed, no deterrent will kill it. No climate can stop it. There you have it, the grain problem. Of course, I say grain only for argument's sake. It could be soy, or maize, or rice, or raspberries, or tomatoes, or cucumbers, or lychees, or whatever you can think of. Oh, and of course, it would be rather inconvenient if all crops, the super crop that conquers the world turns out to be cotton. What will we have to eat? Cotton cookies, perhaps. And wait, what about contraceptive corn? In early 2002, the San Diego-based biotech company Epicite developed a new breed of genetically modified corn that can be used as a contraceptive. The corn kills the sperm cells of the men that eat it, rendering them infertile. Well, you just don't want a crop like that to conquer the world. Humanity would be fucked. Within 1 or 2 generations, our species would no longer be here. And then there's the remote but rather unpleasant possibility that a GM crop suddenly brings forth some kind of killer virus or bacteria. No, really, toying around the planet's genes may accidentally awaken an inactive old virus that lays buried deep within the plant's DNA. Just picture that cheerfully. You go out to harvest your brand new GM crop, and when you get back, your skin has suddenly turned blue with pink dots due to some incredibly weird exotic new disease. Just imagine what a bummer that would be. Finally, you've created a crop that is so totally perfect that you can grow it anywhere you like. Well, except you can't eat it. It's growing all over the place, or it makes you ill, or infertile, and it would be the biggest joke in history, and probably the last.
The discovery of genetically modified wheat in a field in Oregon is a growing concern around the world. That's why officials are working fast to solve this mystery. A wheat plant that simply wouldn't die. The revelation struck fear in some farmers and families and brought more negative attention to a company already in the global crosshairs.
I knew it was going to be an extremely sensitive issue.
Carol Mallory Smith was charged with testing the plant in this Oregon State University lab. She found it was a genetically modified organism, commonly known as a GMO.
All of the tests that we did came up positive.
On May 29th, the USDA confirmed the wheat was genetically modified by the multinational seed corporation Monsanto to resist the company's own popular Roundup weed killer. The modified wheat was never approved for market, and many nations that import American grains are leery of GMOs. South Korea and Japan have even gone so far as to suspend U.S. wheat shipments since the discovery.
It could definitely contribute to a downward spiral if we don't get this fixed or explained.
Grower Darren Paget has 3,200 acres of wheat nearly ready for harvest on his family's farm. He says just the fear of genetically modified wheat could impact his bottom line, especially since 90% of Oregon's wheat crops are exported, most of it to Asia.
You know, your number one cash customer leaves you, that definitely puts you in a bit of a pickle.
For 7 years, Monsanto tested its Roundup-resistant wheat in several states. Those trials ended in 2005, and the company says it took precautions to make sure its modified wheat didn't end up in any other fields.
You don't have 10-year-old wheat seed in the soil emerging 10 years later.
Now a professor and crop expert at Oregon State, Bob Zemetra worked on those Monsanto wheat field studies.
My most likely scenario is it's an accidental mix that something was sitting on a shelf. and somehow it went from the shelf into the seed.
No matter how it happened, it's a nightmare for moms like Zen Honeycutt, who doesn't think GMOs are healthy.
We really believe that these GMOs are compromising an entire generation of our children. We used to be able to let our kids just have a burger and eat the bun, and now I'm really concerned that we're going to need to stop doing that.
She joined thousands around the world, from Boston to Belgium, protesting Monsanto just days before the Oregon wheat story broke.
Say no to GMOs! Say no to GMOs!
So far, no other genetically modified wheat has been found. And even though not approved, the FDA says the wheat is safe to eat. Varieties of Roundup-resistant corn and soy are already in use. Yet some wheat farmers are suing Monsanto, which call the lawsuits nothing more than lawyers chasing tractors, especially since both the government and the company are still digging for answers. And researchers say we may never know how that genetically modified wheat ended up in that field. Stephanie Elam, CNN, Morrow, Oregon.